Hello and welcome to the webinar. Bonjour et bienvenue au webinar. Now today we have simultaneous interpretation for French and English. So I'm just going to explain something in French and then I will come back to English and I will be speaking English for the rest of the time. So en français, nous tenons à rappeler à tous les participants que cette conférence sera enregistrée. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à les écrire dans la partie discussion en appuyant sur le bouton de chat. Certaines parties de la conférence seront en français. Veuillez cliquer sur l'icône lien sur le côté gauche de la page et ouvrir option de traduction pour accéder aux traductions en anglais. Alors, for those of us joining us in English and for those of us joining us in French, welcome again to the webinar. We are here to discuss towards COP26, electricity transmission system operators, key enablers of net zero. And we have a wonderful panel and debate and keynote speakers for you today. We do have one speaker who is going to be presenting in French. So if you would like to hear his presentation in English, that is Mr. Shaher Boulakras. If you would like to hear his presentation in English, please use the link on your screen. You will see that there is, you use the link under the Q&A icon towards the left of your screen, and that will take you through to an option where you can choose English. And so during his speech, you can listen to him in English. And I'll explain that again when we get to his speech. So if you are listening to that translated stream, please mute what you hear on the main webcast. Otherwise, you'll be hearing it in stereo and it won't be nice. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button. So that's any logistical questions, any questions for our speakers today, any questions at all, please put them in the Q&A. So the webinar today is being recorded and it will be made available afterwards. There are no slides, so there is nothing to download. So all you have to do is sit back and listen and take part in this interesting discussion that we have today, which is very topical because obviously we know that COP26 is starting in a few weeks. So that is all the housekeeping notes. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Siobhan Hall and I am the moderator for today. And with that, I would like to hand over to Fintan Sly, who is the director of the UK's national grid, the UK power and gas grid operator. And they are hosting the event. And so, Fintan, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Siobhan, and a great welcome to everyone. And thank you so much for joining. As Siobhan said, my name is Fintan Sy. I am the Executive Director of the Electricity Transmission System Operator at National Grid. And it really is opportune that you're all joining us here today. And it's great to see so many people join with COP being just around the corner. And for me, this really is a seminal moment for individual countries and indeed for society as a whole. And it is imperative that it succeeds and that we grasp the opportunity to set the world on a sustainable path and avoid the potentially catastrophic consequences of continued global warming. And we know in that context that electricity should play a really key role in addressing climate change, but that in order for it to do that, significant change and indeed investment is needed across the industry. And of course, central to all of this are the transmission system operators who sit at the heart of the energy system. And in the UK, just to give you an example of where we're at and what we're doing, we at National Grid Electricity System Operator, we're on track to enable zero carbon operation of Great Britain's electricity system by 2025. Now, initially in 2025, this will be for a few hours, but we've now committed and government has committed to a transition that would see 100% zero carbon generation 100% of the time by 2035. So that's a huge level of ambition, and it's great to see some of that come through in other countries and other societies. So it's great that today we have here with us the presidents of three of the biggest TSO organizations, Go15, Med TSO, and ENTSO-E. along with leaders from the IEA, European Commission, IRENA, the Italian TSO, Terna, and indeed the Californian ISO. And I'm very much looking forward to their keynote addresses and the panel Q&A. And I would very much encourage everyone to participate and engage. Climate change is the challenge of a generation, and it impacts all of us. So please do be engaged. Please do speak up, speak out. Please do ask those hard questions. Very much hope you enjoyed the discussion. And with that, I'll hand you back to Siobhan, who's going to introduce the keynote speakers that we have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fintan. And as you're saying, it's a very critical time for power grid operators in the context of reaching net zero. So it's my great pleasure now to invite the president of one of the organizations Fintan mentioned, that is the GO15, which is the Association of Very Large Power System Operators. And so I would like to invite Ahmed Ali Al-Ibrahim, who is also the CEO of the Gulf Cooperation Council Interconnection Authority. So Mr. Al-Ibrahim, you have the floor. You have 6 minutes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you, Fintan and UK National Grid for hosting such an important event. I'm quite pleased to join such a distinguished group of speakers discussing something that's really important and affects the current and future generation, which is climate change. It has been 6 years since most of the nations of the world signed the Paris Agreement in COP21 to try to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. As nations join again this year in COP26, the aim is to turn the aspirations of Paris into concrete actions. One of the top priorities for climate action is reducing carbon emissions. Globally, the highest source of such emissions are electricity and heat generation systems, which contribute to about 31% of total global emissions. To be able to decarbonize the electricity and heat systems, electrification has been identified as key to reaching deep decarbonization to curb the worst impacts of climate change. Of course, electrification will achieve decarbonization only if there is ample and affordable clean energy connected to a reliable and sustainable power grid. That is why we at the GO15, the Association of Very Large Power Grid Operators, bringing together the 16 largest power grid operators in the world, serving more than 3 billion consumers across the globe and more than half of the world electricity demand, recognize the importance and pivotal role of electricity transmission system operators and a resilient power system in enabling the energy transition and climate neutrality by 2050. GO15 was created in 2004, and its high-level CO discussions go beyond grid infrastructures. We address major strategic and technical issues affecting the security, reliability, and sustainability of power systems. Additionally, strategic working groups have been formed by experts from GO15 member companies to carry out collaborative studies and set collaborative actions towards strategic issues that affect the sector. Currently, our strategic working groups are focusing on the themes of pathways to a low-carbon power grid and the resilience of the electricity infrastructure. We believe that organizations such as GO15, ENTSO-E, and Mid-TSO play an important role as platforms to foster global collaborative action towards major strategic issues such as climate change. GO15 members target to achieve decarbonization and reducing the carbon footprint by building the grid of the future, focusing on two main functions. First, by building secure, reliable, and resilient grids to enable integration and transmission of large quantities of renewable and clean energy resources, in addition to building solid regional interconnections to enable large amounts of electrical energy exchanges between different countries and regions. And secondly, by smartening the electricity markets and grid operations to be able to cope with the intermittency of renewable energy resources. Although renewable energy penetration within GO15 members is currently at an average of 25%, some of our members reach levels of renewable energy generation that approach 95% at times. Therefore, renewable energy integration becomes a major challenge to all grid operators. Smart and innovative technologies and practices become a must to mitigate these issues. Another area of concern to electricity grid operators is the effect of increasingly extreme weather events influenced by climate change on the security of the grid. Extreme weather events are occurring more often and becoming more severe, which means we need to have more consideration to the robustness and generally resilience of our grids. Grid infrastructure will need to be designed to withstand such extreme weather events, in addition to building robust regional interconnections for securing energy exchanges during emergencies and to provide needed additional system inertia, which is negatively influenced by solar PV generation. In the GCC countries where I come from, the GCC Interconnection Authority built a 400 kV super grid backbone interconnecting the 6 countries of the Gulf, namely United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait. The solid GCC interconnection backbone has proven its capability to provide a new level of security of supplies by avoiding blackouts and major power cuts in the GCC for the last 12 years, and providing a platform for exchange and trade of electricity between members. Such backbone interconnection also paves the way for the future regional interconnected grid, which will be a major enabler for the GCC countries to achieve their major plans for decarbonization and transitioning towards clean energy sources. There is a need for solidarity and collaborative efforts in order to achieve the goal of COP21. Many nations have taken actions as set goals to reach 100% clean energy within the next 20 to 30 years. It looks technically achievable, but many challenges still exist in terms of technologies needed and the policies to be implemented to enable the grid operators to achieve these goals. We reaffirm our belief and commitment towards achieving the climate change goal and fulfilling the central role of grid operators and call for collaborative global efforts to achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Now, you mentioned there how the cooperation between the Gulf countries and the Interconnecting Authority helped with improving security of supply. What is happening in that area to help with achieving the climate change goals?
Well, the GCC countries have put very solid plans to transition into clean energy. There are big plans to develop renewables and already enforced. There are big targets for fuel savings. The cumulative fuel savings, according to the plans of the GCC, will be more than 350 million barrel of oil equivalent by 2030. The emission saving in CO2, it will be more than 130 million ton of CO2 by 2030. Most of the countries now are very much ahead of their plan. They're actually exceeding their targets, and every year we see that the targets are being lifted and the bar being lifted. And there is really lots of commitment of all the GCC countries to achieve that. In the midst of that, the GCC interconnection provides the platform to help them and enable them to carry out this kind of integration of renewables and achieving their goals. We're also considering interconnection with neighboring countries, with Iraq and Jordan and Egypt and India. And by expanding the grid beyond the region, we will really enable the GCC countries to achieve their goals.
Okay, so some ambitious plans there and some opportunity there for even more collaboration beyond what you're doing at the moment, which I think is one of the things we're going to be coming back to for the panel debate. Thank you so much, Ahmed. It was really interesting to have your views. We were honored to have you here, and we thank you again. I'm going to turn now to our second keynote speaker, who is Hervé Lefebvre, and he is the president of ENTSO-E, which is the European Association of Transmission System Operators, and he is also a member of the executive board for the French Power TSO RTE. Hervé, you have the floor.
Thank you, Siobhan, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and my two friends, presidents of MET-TSO and GO15. Many thanks again to Fintan and National Grid Electric System Operator to host this event and to invite us. I want first to point out that the energy transition that we are living and which, of course, is connected to climate change is not the first one perhaps we live, but this one is probably unique in terms of speed and of magnitude. And electricity is promised, as was already said, to play a key role in the future we have. I take two figures to illustrate. The offshore capacities will be multiplied by 30 between today and 2050 in Europe. And the International Energy Agency, for instance, emphasizes that all the energy transition will require doubling of the investments in the energy sector from 2030 to 2050. So not only it will be a question of speed and magnitude, but it's also a question of a quarter of century that we are facing now. When it comes, for instance, to offshore wind farms, and since COP26 is in Scotland, it's very close to that, we are expecting the arrival of the equivalent of 1/4 to 1/3 of the present installed capacity in Europe, in the North Sea. And it is obvious that this type of location changes for the source of energy are asking the development of a new infrastructure, or to be more precise, a substantial extension of the interconnected grid. And this implies to associate as much as possible the impacted areas' inhabitants, and the TSOs and the ENTSO-E TSOs are committed to explain the need for these new lines and substations and take all measures to help gaining confidence and acceptance from the public. But this energy mix transition has not only to cope with locational issues. The intermittent nature of these new sources of energy is changing the paradigm of balance between demand and generation. And you know that the TSOs are in charge of keeping an eye on this balance, this instantaneous balance. So in this transition, the grids, and particularly the transmission grids, have a key role. I would say, as usual, to connect the sources of energy, then to reinforce the transmission capacity, which will be now transcontinental, since given the amount of energy that has to be wheeled from one corner of the continent to the other. And this, of course, has to be done while maintaining the high but required level of security, since electricity will also be more and more crucial and vital to the society activities. And despite the last pandemic episode has proved our level of resilience, we will probably in the future have to face new severe crises, given the climate change impact on weather, for instance. In close relationship with the energy regulators, ENTSO-E, the association, is also working on adapting the interface with the market actors so that competition, in order to select the more competitive inputs, is fully allowed in order to optimize the global cost of this transition and allow the affordability for all citizens. To achieve this, cooperation between interconnected transmission operators is more than ever a need, and I'm proud to say that in ENTSO-E, the original values of sharing and solidarity are strongly alive. But in this new context, the cooperation will have to be extended to a larger set of stakeholders. I would particularly mention the cooperation we have with distribution system operators and the association in what will be more and more question of an interconnected system of systems. In the same spirit, we are also engaged into taking into account the links with other energy sectors. For instance, the cooperation with the European Gas Operators Sister Association on the elaboration of scenarios paving the way to the climate objectives. Finally, I want to mention that in comparison with past transition or crisis, technology has of course brought new solutions and new threats as well, such as cybersecurity. This is why innovation based on R&D results is also a stream of cooperation for the European TSOs in order to find and implement smart solutions. To conclude, I want to highlight how pan-European TSOs are committed to not only enable this transition, but to help have it taking into account security issues and sustainability of the solutions, both in societal, environmental, and economic aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Hervé, for that first overview of some of the key points that ENTSO-E are looking at. Now, some of the things I heard there was the importance of collaboration between TSOs, which builds on what Ahmed was saying before. But you also mentioned there collaboration with district system operators. So why is that now so much more interesting and important in terms of tackling climate change than perhaps it was before?
Well, I can see, Siobhan, two reasons in the changes that we are living. The first one is that more and more generations is now embedded in the distribution level of interconnection, and we need to at least to exchange data and in order to have a right vision on the balance between electricity and between demand and generation. And the other reason is that, as you know, one way to cope with the variability of the new sources is what we call flexibility. And also the sources of flexibility will be at the distribution level. So we have to really cooperate with our distribution colleagues in order to share, I would say, the use of such resources.
So yes, so flexibility is one of the buzzwords in the European power sector, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about the importance of flexibility going forward. So thank you so much, Hervé, for that very succinct overview of the situation so far. And I'd like to thank you. And then I'm going to move to introduce our next speaker, who is Monsieur Shaher Boulakris. Now, Mr. Boulakris will be giving his presentation in French. So if you want to listen to an interpretation in English, you can if you look to the left of your screen underneath the Q&A, the question mark logo, you should see a link icon. And then if you click on that link, it should take you to a new page where you can click on the English interpretation. So I'm going to give you a moment for those who want to listen to an English translation of Monsieur Boulakris' presentation, which will be in French. And you see the message on the screen as well. And so I'm going to switch to French. And alors maintenant, je vais parler en français et j'invite Monsieur Boulakris à devenir sur le site. Monsieur Boulakris est le président de MED-TSO, qui est l'association de GRT de l'électricité de 19 pays méditerranéens. Et il est aussi le PDG de GRT à l'Algérienne Sonargaz. Alors, Monsieur Boulakris, est-ce que vous êtes là?
Monsieur le directeur général, Gris d'Assaut. Donc, monsieur le directeur de National Grid ESSO, monsieur le président et mon confrère de ENTSO, monsieur Hervé, monsieur le président aussi de JO15, Mohamed Ali Ibrahim, mesdames et messieurs les secrétaires généraux des associations respectives, mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités. En fait, je rejoins ma voix à celle de mes confrères qui m'avaient précédé. Avant cela, donc, je voudrais remercier les organisateurs de cette conférence pour l'invitation qui m'a été adressée et, à travers moi, notre association MED-TSO, des gestionnaires des réseaux de transport méditerranéens. Je me réjouis aussi de me trouver parmi vous et d'intervenir dans cette réunion dédiée aux principaux catalyseurs de net zéro en prévision de la prochaine COP26, comme vous savez, qui se tiendra dans quelques jours et qui évoquera, bien entendu, les aspects liés au changement climatique prévu à Glasgow, en Écosse. Je me réjouis autant plus que je m'adresse à une audience prestigieuse, composée de managers d'envergure, de responsables gouvernementaux et d'éminents chercheurs, afin de discuter sur des actions de lutte contre les changements climatiques qui constituent le plus grand défi à relever par nous tous, pour espérer contribuer à long terme à la stabilisation des températures et à des seuils acceptables. La lutte contre le changement climatique sera essentielle pour créer un avenir plus prospère, équitable, résilient et durable. Pour cela, il faudrait rechercher des solutions innovantes autour de la décarbonisation de nos systèmes électriques, d'une part, et également dans les autres secteurs. D'autre part, pour accéder en profondeur aux mutations indispensables pour atteindre l'ambition net zéro pour les entreprises, les gouvernements et les économies. Mesdames et messieurs, ENTSO, pour ceux qui ne la connaissent pas bien, a été créée en 2012. C'est une association de gestionnaires des réseaux de transport d'électricité méditerranéenne qui exploite les réseaux de transmission à haute tension pour 18 pays méditerranéens. La mission de ENTSO est de soutenir toutes les initiatives, institutionnelles notamment, visant à faciliter la création d'un marché méditerranéen de l'énergie et de développer un réseau régional de transport d'électricité qui soit intégré, sûr et durable. ENTSO, dans ses plans d'action, œuvre à une réduction, sinon une élimination du carbone, un rêve ambitieux, dans l'atmosphère régionale, grâce à des solutions basées sur le développement d'un schéma directeur de transport d'électricité au niveau de la Méditerranée et espère également atteindre, à moyen et long terme, un impact positif sur l'environnement grâce à une possible conservation du climat à des taux raisonnables. Au-delà de l'engagement, ou de cet engagement, notre association cherche à développer toutes ses connaissances et à utiliser toutes ses capacités et à mutualiser tous ses moyens pour soutenir d'autres associations qui travaillent à l'amélioration et à la protection de l'environnement et créer justement cette passerelle devenue aujourd'hui irréversible. Mesdames et messieurs, de nombreux signes révélateurs d'un climat change ont déjà un impact sur la sécurité des individus, des sociétés et des gouvernements qui ont reconnu la nécessité d'une action collégiale, climatique et urgente. Pour notre association, nous encourageons bien évidemment la recherche et le développement de solutions innovantes, à l'instar des énergies propres, des hybridations des réseaux et sans carbone issus des ressources renouvelables, dont l'impact quotidien sur le climat et l'environnement est très réduit et constitue de ce fait un choix fondamental de lutte contre le changement climatique et demeure par conséquent des priorités élevées pour les gestionnaires de réseaux de transport d'électricité à tous les échelons. Néanmoins, la transition énergétique en général, à travers le volet lié aux énergies renouvelables, en particulier, qui sont certes favorisées, présente les défis colossaux en termes d'intégration sur les réseaux de transport et voire même sur les réseaux de distribution. En outre, les gestionnaires des réseaux de transport d'électricité se sont engagés à lutter contre le changement climatique à l'instar des autres associations, car ils ont un rôle important à jouer pour faciliter la réduction des émissions du système électrique et des secteurs connectés à leur chaîne de valeur et y afférents. Notre position en tant que région méditerranéenne et notre rôle en tant qu'association de gestionnaires des réseaux de transport d'électricité nous motivent à plus qu'un titre à soutenir l'accélération de la transition énergétique et à renforcer notre rôle de transporteur d'énergie propre en mettant en exergue notre coordination dans l'exploitation des systèmes électriques méditerranéens, le développement et l'intégration des technologies innovantes pour aider à atteindre les objectifs net zéro dans le cadre de l'accord de Paris et de la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques. Mesdames et messieurs, les transporteurs d'électricité, à l'instar des producteurs d'ailleurs, doivent tenir compte aussi bien des réglementations, mais aussi des lois existantes, que de nouvelles réglementations axées essentiellement sur le changement climatique dans le cadre de la conduite de l'élaboration de toute étude de planification à l'avenir pour réduire un tant soit peu les émissions nettes à zéro et contribuent ainsi à la stabilisation des températures à l'échelle régionale. Ils doivent travailler également sur les 4 volets. Volet règles ou réglementaires, légal et institutionnel, volet transverse, volet technique, mais aussi le volet financier. Mesdames et messieurs, les transporteurs d'électricité, à l'instar des producteurs aussi, doivent puiser tous leurs efforts à travers des voies et moyens et des pistes de réflexion qui devraient contenir des informations sur les réglementations cibles, la planification des ressources, les objectifs d'émissions de carbone chiffrés, quantifiés, ainsi que sur les technologies et solutions de réduction de carbone, pour permettre notamment à notre association d'élaborer des schémas directeurs, chacun selon ses spécificités, ainsi que les ressources dont il dispose et des capacités de transport en adéquation avec ces drivers, afin de nous positionner en tant qu'acteurs clés en matière de protection et de conservation de l'environnement et de la nature. Dans cette perspective, nous considérons que pour notre association, la coopération transfrontalière entre les différents acteurs est une valeur fondamentale pour atteindre cet objectif de fournisseur régional d'énergie propre, tout en apportant des solutions durables aux défis environnementaux et aux problématiques de préservation des ressources énergétiques d'origine fossile. Mesdames et messieurs, notre association, en tant que décideur, mais aussi responsable gestionnaire des réseaux méditerranéens, rejoint de la position des leaders politiques et d'opinion qui abordent des sujets allant des risques climatiques, physiques et de la résilience aux transitions énergétiques, au transport et au rôle de la conservation de la nature. C'est pour cette raison, à l'issue de cette conférence, comme vous le savez, nous sommes mis d'accord conjointement à procéder à une déclaration commune axée principalement sur le rôle que devrait jouer toute association pour la protection de l'environnement, pour un développement durable et une planète verte et une planète meilleure pour les générations futures. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Une question sur la collaboration. J'ai entendu que la collaboration, c'est un point très important pour les GRT, et je voudrais savoir qu'est-ce que c'est la collaboration la plus importante dans votre région. Il y a des choses, des spécificités de la région. Dites-moi les choses sur la collaboration dans le Méditerranée, s'il vous plaît. Désolé pour les problèmes techniques.
Merci, madame, pour cette question pertinente. Tout d'abord, la collaboration doit se faire d'abord dans un cadre régional, au niveau donc des pôles énergétiques, que ce soit dans la région de l'Afrique du Nord, aussi bien que la région donc, de l'Europe du Sud. C'est ce qui constitue un peu les dérives de la Méditerranée. Il y a aussi une coopération entre tout ce qui est pôle énergétique de l'Afrique du Nord et le reste du continent. Donc une collaboration par pôle, une collaboration régionale et une collaboration continentale. Ça sur un peu l'aspect géographique. Si on fait un peu la corrélation avec aussi les organisations qui sont un peu structurées, nous avons beaucoup d'associations aussi qui activent dans le domaine du transport, et je pense que les gestionnaires de réseau joueront un grand rôle en termes de coopération à l'effet, parce que tout va transiter, toute énergie, tout électron vert doit transiter par des réseaux. Et je pense que c'est extrêmement important de poursuivre le développement des interconnexions, d'aller aussi ça, sur l'aspect flux physique, et aussi d'aller aussi vers des marchés régionaux, des marchés aussi territoriaux et des marchés continentaux, tout ça pour mutualiser l'accès au consommateur final de l'énergie verte à travers les réseaux existants, les réseaux à développer et à mutualiser toutes les ressources naturelles qui versent dans la protection de l'environnement. C'est pour cette raison que nous avions tenu justement à élaborer une déclaration commune. Ça confirme, ça réaffirme aussi la volonté de ces associations, et j'invite aussi le reste aussi à rejoindre leur voix à la nôtre pour édifier un véritable avenir meilleur, un véritable avenir basé sur un accompagnement véritable des changements climatiques. Et personnellement, j'appréhende beaucoup les résolutions de la prochaine rencontre de la COP26. Je pense que les choses et les taux vont encore se resserrer davantage, autant anticiper sur ces questions-là d'environnement. Merci.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur Boulacras, et encore désolé pour les problèmes techniques. I will switch back to English now. So thank you again, Monsieur Boulacras, for the view from the Mediterranean. We are now moving to the panel debate, and I am delighted that we have such a very experienced selection of people for our panel debate. So I would just like to introduce them briefly, and then we will move on to the questions. So we have from the International Energy Agency, we have Tom Howes, who is Head of Energy and Environment Division. From the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center, we have Dolph Gielen, who is the director there. From the Californian Independent System Operator Company, CAISO, we have Elliot Mainzer, who is President and CEO. Then we welcome back Fintan Sly, who you heard earlier, who is the director of the UK Grid Operator National Grid. Now, unfortunately, the CEO of Italian Grid Operator, Stefano Donnarumma, was not able to be with us, unfortunately, but we are very delighted to have stepping in for him Guido Guida, who is Head of International Affairs at Turner and also an ENTSO-E board member. Thank you, Guido, for stepping in at such short notice. Now, unfortunately, we also hope to have Joachim Balke, who is from the European Commission. We're having some technical problems connecting with him, but we are still hopeful that he will come, so we will leave a space for him. But we are going to move on, and we are going to go straight into the panel questions. And we are going to start. We were hearing earlier from our keynote speakers about some of the work that TSOs are doing and the role that TSOs can play in achieving net zero. So my first question for the panel is, what do you see as the biggest challenge for grid operators in supporting this accelerated energy transition that we are looking at today? And I'd like to start with some of our new speakers. So I'd like to start with Elliot. Elliot, what would you think? What do you say is the biggest challenge?
Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you today. I appreciate the conversation. And I think the key word in your question is accelerating. I think for those of us that are operating large grids around the world, with such rapid pace of technological and policy change, I think our key challenge is keeping ahead of that change, anticipating what's coming next, looking at the changing resource base, looking at the changing patterns of usage of our grid, understanding the kinds of new resources that will want to be integrated into our energy markets, and building the technology platform and the tools for our control center operators so that they can manage those changes in a reliable fashion. Ultimately, our goal is to help our policymakers, our regulators, our customers, the many partners that we have across the region to achieve this transition in a reliable fashion. And it requires a lot of anticipation of change and getting ahead of the curve. I would say that's how I would characterize that.
Excellent. So anticipating what's coming and trying to get ahead of it. So a technological challenge from Elliot. Okay, and I'd like to come now to Guido. What do you see as the biggest challenge for grid operators?
First of all, thank you very much for having the possibility to talk in this event, and also thank you very much to Fintan for hosting this event. I spoke on behalf of the Italian transmission operator, Terna, and our big challenge is to integrate renewable energy sources. So achieving European decarbonization in Italy means the increase of renewable energy sources. In particular, there is a need, according to the target fixed for the 2030, to have more than 70 gigawatt of new photovoltaic and wind generation installed. So this requires a huge amount of investment. So this has to be accelerated. And in particular, on our side in Italy, we published the 10-year development plan for Italy and on July of this year. and which we foresee 18 billion of investment in 10 years. So it is 25% more respected to the previous plan. And our goal in this case is to push. The main problem is integrating the renewable resources is to push the consumption in Italy is all mainly located in the north. Whilst all the renewable energy sources located, it will be located in the south. So to transfer this energy from the south to the north, and in particular avoiding to have congestions. But also the important thing is to integrate the alternative system with other countries and allow to have an exchange of resources from the north, where we have a lot of wind generation, to the south, but also in the future from the south, from the Mediterranean area to the north. And the third point, maybe very, very important, is related to the resilience. To increase the resilience is one of our topics in order to be able to manage the increasing heavy weather condition and avoid, in this case, blackouts, but also to be able to restore the system as some events happen. So those are the main points on our side, and I can say that with this plan, we also are reaching the target in order to reduce CO2. In particular, with this plan, we are going to reduce the CO2 emissions by 5.6 million tons per year. So those are the main challenges.
Okay. So we've had there's a technology challenge, there's the integration challenge, there's a sort of a geographic challenge, which interconnection is going to be the solution to all of that.
In particular, resilience is on not only infrastructure but also tool systems that help you to foresee what are the situations and to be able to react in the appropriate way.
Okay, and then also mention there of severe weather conditions perhaps getting worse going forward, which was one of the topics in the previous session with the keynotes. So Fintan, you were listening to the keynotes, you've heard what your colleagues were saying. What do you see as the key challenges for grid operators?
I suppose the first thing I'd do is I'd agree with both Elliot and Guido. I mean, I think that they summarized the key challenges really well. I think from our perspective, we sort of look out to the future and say, look, there's three big questions that we need to answer or help the UK answer. The first is, what's that portfolio of resources and what role does demand play in that gets you out from sort of, in our case, the late 2020s out to 2035, when you can have 100% renewable energy 100% of the time. So in that, it's like, what's the role of nuclear? What's the role of CCUS? How much of a role does hydrogen play? How do we think about long-term storage and all of that to deliver system services? For us, there's a big resource question, and don't think there's a silver bullet answer, but there is a portfolio question there to make sure that you can keep security supply at the level that society and the economy needs. The second question then is, what's the set of networks that you need to move this around the country from wherever it's produced to wherever it's needed? How does interconnection fit with that as well? And what are sort of some of the maybe non-network solutions that you can put in place that might be more effective or less costly or less impactful on communities? And then the third big question is, what's the set of market arrangements that works in a net zero world? Because the set of market arrangements we have typically were built on sort of dispatchable fossil fuel generation with increasing cost curves. It's really, really different when everyone has sort of virtually zero incremental variable costs in that. So what set of markets do you need, and what role does locational signals play in all that? So there's sort of three big questions. And we say, okay, in addition to that, as Guido said, we need to operate the system and work out in that changed resource mix, how can you ensure that you can operate the system at really, really low levels of inertia and stability and still make sure that you manage it properly and at a reasonable cost to consumers? And I suppose my overarching message then, Siobhan, I would say, is that this is a huge change for system operators and how they think about their role, moving, as Elliot, I think, talked about, to much more digitally enabled, innovative and agile companies that are very much trying to look ahead, because the pace of change in the industry is only accelerating. And we need to make sure as system operators that we stay ahead of that, such that we can enable these technologies to come on, but doing it in a way that continues to deliver safe and secure and reliable power to the economy, to society, and to our customers.
Okay, so essentially these are interesting times for TSOs, and it sounds like they're only going to get more interesting, which you can interpret any way you like, but definitely interesting. So I'd like to take this opportunity just to welcome Joachim Balker, who has managed to join us. So welcome, Joachim. Thank you very much for joining us. We're still on the first question for the panel debate, which is what are the key challenges? And I will come to you at the end, so you have time to familiarize yourself with the setup. So we were talking there, or you were all talking there about looking ahead. And if there's one organization that loves to look ahead, it's the International Energy Agency. So Tom, what do you see? Do you agree with what the key challenges are? And do you see that, is there something that sort of international agencies can do to help with this process? You know, is there some way to support the TSOs in these challenges?
Absolutely, yes to both your questions. Firstly, we agree with all those challenges. That these are the kinds of things that we try to pick up and look at when we do our own modelling of decarbonisation pathways, and we include these kinds of developments, the massive rollout of renewables, the major investment needed in electricity grids. These are all things that we explore in our analysis, in our modelling. For instance, in our net zero scenario, where we get the world to tend to net zero by 2050, and the issues that come out here are exactly those that you've identified. For us, there's a big difference between what's going on in your developed world and what's going on in the rest of the world. In a sense, Europe in particular has already been a laboratory for exploring how to get to already high rates of penetration of variable renewables in the grids over the last decade or so. So in a sense, you've already addressed a lot of the technical issues, and you've got good network. Well, literally, you've got amongst the finest electricity grids in the world. You've also got good collaboration and network across the institutions within Europe. So in that sense, you provide a good model for the rest of the world in terms of how to share expertise, share best practice, and learn from each other. So that's something that can really be, we would be happy to help share with the rest of the world. So I think the challenges you've identified are there in spades when you look beyond OECD countries. You've got a good network to tackle them initially, but the same issues of investments, of the technological challenge, of the investment challenges are something that we will need to pick up even more so with the developed world. And we'll be talking more about that at COP when the rest of the world is learning from what you're doing in Europe.
That's a very interesting point there, Tom. I mean, you know, obviously Europe wants to position itself as a leader, so it'll be interesting to see what can be transferred in terms of knowledge and expertise and best practices and so on. And because you were mentioning there about life outside Europe, I'd like to bring in Dolph. I mean, we've been hearing that the TSOs are going to have to change some of the ways they do things, that technology will be important. So what can an organization like IRENA bring to the debate and to help TSOs, not just in Europe, but, you know, because this is a COP26 focused event, you know, more widely?
Yeah, I mean, as all the speakers have already said, I mean, renewable power, and especially solar and wind, is the way to go. That is a global trend. But on top of that, we have electrification. We need to triple electricity demand in the next 30 years. So that means we're going to need a lot of investments into grids and into enabling charging infrastructure, etc. According to our numbers, it's in the order of 25 trillion to 30 trillion of investments that are needed, US dollars. So we need Also a different type of flexibility going forward. So traditionally flexibility came from dispatchable fossil fuel, and that's going to disappear. So we need a lot more demand side flexibility. That means you need a different attention also. What you already see that the split of TSOs and DSOs is a bit disappearing. You need at least a lot more dialogue there. We need to get that flexibility from 4 areas. So we need, of course, technology investments, including new grid lines, which is a big challenge in Europe. But we also need adjustments in market design, as was said. I mean, there is the pricing issue on the wholesale side, but there's also the pricing issue for the consumers. And consumers need to have these price signals so you get the demand response. You need adjustments in system operation. There's still some gains to be had in how much terawatt hours you can transport in every line. And also we need new business models that can enable some of that demand side potential. So, and we're working with our members, so 166 countries, ranging from small islands to the size of China and the US. We're working with all of them. We're going through that toolbox of flexibility options and say what is now the best mix in your specific power system condition, and that's often an interesting dialogue. It's not always batteries that is the best solution.
Okay, so what's interesting there is that it's going to be very specific to each grid situation, geographically, access to resources and so on, how that transition evolves. So I'd like to bring in Joachim now. So I mean, you've heard various people talking about the key challenges. I mean, a couple of ones that stand out are the need for flexibility and also for a market design that promotes the energy transition. So what do you see the Commission being able to do or having done to help with those particular challenges?
Thanks, first of all, very much for the organizers for having me, and Siobhan for the introduction. And I hope that the link functions now and that you can hear me. So apologies for the for getting lost a little bit in the virtual ether. But I have managed to follow, I think, most of your contributions. And I think, first of all, certainly from the side of the European Commission, I mean, in our analysis, I think we can echo much of the analysis that has been put forward in terms of where the challenges lie. I would also like to pick up in particular on what Tom said about the fact that, relatively speaking, we're in a privileged position in Europe because we do have a well-developed grid, and that is certainly true. That is something also on which we are proud. That being said, the challenges are still enormous, as amongst others the colleague from TANA has already spelled out. We will, according to our scenarios, have to quite simply double the amount of installed renewable capacity on our grids between now and 2030. And that is a really short time frame to adapt our grid infrastructure. We will most certainly have to develop that grid significantly further. But I would just like to summarize the challenges basically under one term, which is cooperation. Naturally, perhaps for us as Commission, that is something we think needs to increase, and that on at least 3 levels. So, of course, for us, naturally, the kind of cooperation that we want to promote and that we are promoting is cross-border cooperation, in particular on a regional level. I would emphasize, because I think what we have realized is that sort of the regional context in terms of regions of Europe is a good is a good size sort of going forward for bringing forward TSO cooperation in an operational format, and that's a type of cooperation which I think needs to go forward. exactly as we've already heard, in order to be able to balance the different availabilities, for example, of renewable generation at any point in time with the demand that we might have. The second level is then between the different network levels. So in particular between the transmission system operators and the distribution system operators. I think one of the colleagues also alluded to that. And that is indeed quite important, given that a lot of the additional renewable capacity will be connected at the distribution level. But I would also like to add here that while this is a lot, there's also going to be a lot of centralized renewables. So this old discussion between is it going to be decentralized or centralized, clearly both. I think that's quite sure. But we do need to intensify this DSO-TSO cooperation to ensure that also the links function, and basically whatever is produced on a decentralized level can also serve demand potentially in another part of Europe. And lastly, and perhaps that element has not yet been mentioned, at least as long as I've been in the call, we do also need to enhance the cooperation, in particular at the planning stage between the different sectors. So what we call sometimes system integration. That is quite a complex task, but we do think it's quite important to at least start thinking about grid and infrastructure development beyond electricity, and link it, for example, also with potential future hydrogen infrastructure, to name only the most prominent example. So I think on all three levels, we think that there is scope to further intensify cooperation, and we're trying to foster that as Commission.
Okay, so I mean that theme of cooperation is as they say in French, it's a red line through some of the discussions today, and we are going to come back to that cooperation theme in a moment. But I just want to get some reactions from our industry representatives, and I'd like to start with Elliot, because I've been hearing about Europe and then I hear about the broader world. But I wonder if you have if there is a specific American view or perspective that you can bring us on, on some of these issues like market design or flexibility. I mean, do you see Europe being something that America is learning from, or can Europe learn from what happens in America? How do you see that?
I think it really goes both ways. Actually, the GEO15 effort, the GPSC, some of the efforts that were involved together, and the exchange of information, I think has excellent benefits going both directions, because we're all sort of leading in different areas. One area that I will speak to that we're really, I think, conducting something of a global experiment right now is with battery storage. The operational challenges in California, we operate. The California ISO operates the grid for about 80% of the state of California. We have about 40 million people in California. We have taken on the goal of decarbonizing our power sector by 2045. That's likely to be accelerated in one fashion or another, just given how quickly our climate and the severity of drought and west-wide problems are in the Western United States. But what has happened with our system, as we've put, over 15,000 megawatts of solar energy on our grid, is that the peak stress on our system is now concentrated in the early evening, during and after the sunset, when you still have quite a bit of demand on the system, but your solar energy fleet starts to ramp out. And so we're finding that 4-hour lithium-ion batteries are proving, for this phase of our evolution, quite effective in that construct. So by the end of this year, we will have 3,000 megawatts of lithium-ion batteries on our grid. They will absorb excess solar energy during the middle of the day, and then right around 6 p.m., they'll be available to reinsert that power back into the system to compensate for the loss of generation from solar. We just worked our way through an extraordinarily challenging summer again in California. As a matter of fact, through the entire western United States. We've had unprecedented hot temperatures throughout the Western United States, literally smashed all previous records. We had enormous wildfires, which actually took out some of the major transmission lines feeding into California. And so our grid was extraordinarily stressed, and the batteries proved themselves just incredibly valuable. And so what I'll leave you with is what we're doing in California is as we administer both the physical transmission system and the energy market, and we have that fundamental responsibility around reliability, we're always trying to make sure that our energy market is aligned with the reliability needs of the system to the maximum extent possible. And so as we bring on batteries, we're making sure that the price signals and the compensation mechanisms of our energy market are sending the right incentives for those batteries to perform the functions that we need. And we're also now thinking chemistry on very helpful, but we're going to need 8-hour, 24-hour to really supplement that over time. So battery storage is an area that we're really leaning in and looking forward to sharing and learning from others as well.
Thank you, Elliot. There was just a slight jump there on what I heard, but I definitely got the message that you've had a very challenging summer. We've all seen that, and that battery storage in the Californian case is something that you are really investing heavily in. So that's a very interesting. I just want to say to the organisers, I hear an echo again. If we can, oh, it's gone. Good. So just briefly carry on with the reactions. So Guido, you were talking about, Italy's planning to install many tens of gigawatts of PV and wind. Do you see yourself being do you see Italy reaching a similar sort of position as California, where there's going to be, the problem in the early evening when the sun goes down and everyone wants to make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and there's still some issues there?
Yeah, what Elliot said is fully represent also what are the needs in Italy. We need more flexibility resources, especially to cover the ramp during the afternoon, especially during the summer period. So having adequate instrument that allow to increase also from a market point of view, this kind of flexibility is very, very useful. And there is a need, as also let's said, to have an acceleration to develop storage systems. And I'm referring here not only to the batteries, but also to hydro storage power plant, because they are really the real flexible resources, and they are very capital intensive. And so I think that there is a need to have regulatory instrument that allow to develop such kind of instruments. If then I refer to also to increase demand side and flexibility, in this case I can also use an example of a platform in which developed by Terna with other European TSOs, whose name is Equigi. The objective is Equigi is a balancing platform that set the base for accelerating the integration of flexibility, small flexibility resources in the system. In particular, I'm referring to electrical vehicle and batteries, using in this case the blockchain. The objective of this project is to set across industry standards through Europe to support a future-proof, reliable, and cost-effective power system. If you allow me, Ivan, some few minutes more, I would like also to. No, okay.
No, not at this point. No, maybe later. But because you're already touching on cooperation, and we will come back to that. But thank you for asking me first. Okay. But I say no. Okay. Thank you, Guido. I mean, there's obviously interesting things on technology and blockchain, which is obviously one of the buzzwords also at the moment. So I mean, I'd like to come back to Fintan, because we're going around and we're hearing how California is coping with some of those severe weather conditions that were mentioned earlier on that might become more common. And Guido has his a ballasting platform, if I understood correctly. And so, Fintan, I mean, how do you see the UK developing its response to the challenges that we've been discussing? I mean, battery storage. I'm not sure there's that much pumped hydro, but how do you see it?
So I think it's a combination of things. I don't think there's one silver bullet answer to all of this. So, you know, I think what Elliot and CalISO are doing around integrating batteries is really at the leading edge of this. And, you know, we're going to learn a lot from what Elliot has done. And he and his team have been really open about the learnings that they're having that we can integrate here. So we already have some batteries, I think. But for us, I think it is, in addition to sort of having batteries, you're also looking at how do you think differently about the services that you want. So how do you get demand engaged in the market and providing services? How can you aggregate up EVs and get them into the market as well, providing response and reserve? How can you leverage interconnection with other markets in a way that provides added flexibility? And I think you said at the start, Siobhan, that flexibility was one of those things that we were going to come back to. And I think that certainly is at the core of some of those challenges that system operators are thinking about. And for us, it's how do you deliver that flexibility? And to pick up something that was said by Joachim, I think, around making sure that where those resources are in the distribution system, that we can also have visibility of them and that they can participate in the sort of wider transmission markets as well. So I think it's going to be a range of solutions, Siobhan. I think all of the different markets will use them, but to different extents, depending on the specifics of the individual market.
Okay, brilliant. So I see that we have some questions coming in from the audience, and I will come to some of those in a moment. But I just want to continue for a moment on the issue of cooperation that Joachim was saying earlier, and looking at whether there are existing examples of best practices. And this may well be Guido's opportunity to come back with whatever I stopped him saying earlier. But I'm looking to hear about examples of best practices among grid operators sharing best practices, and what the outcomes of such best practices. So Guido, I mean, I come back to you. I think you may have some examples of best practices to share.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, for this opportunity. The strong cooperation among TSOs is very, very important, and also with distributors. But I would like to say in particular that with TSOs, we are all on the same boat. We have at the end, as you also did, we are saying the same challenges, and we also published together, together with the other TSOs of 7 European countries, published a document in which a report with explaining the role of TSO decarbonizing the energy system, in which we described with the concrete example that the role of TSOs is not only to reduce losses, so to work on its own carbon footprint and value chain, but with our investments. All of TSOs have a huge investment to integrate renewable energy sources and to be able to reach and to the target defined by the European Union. And with concrete example, we showed that our role is very important for the integrated renewable energy sources, for the flexibilities and to electrification. So this is really important because it described and made aware in particular the financial institutions and EU legislations, EU regulators, that the role that we have in driving the energy transition. And we also hope that this is really taken into account within the regulation. And in this, with this concrete example, for example, in this paper, you can find the EquiG project shared and led by 4 European TSOs. But we have a lot of these examples, and I think it's very useful for the reader in understanding what we are doing, and in particular the fact that we cooperate, we work together as TSOs, not only in the associations, but also together for our industrial activities.
Okay, so there is a paper that people can go and find if they're interested in finding out more about the
it was published middle of July of this year.
Okay. Very topical, very topical. So on the sharing best practices, again, Elliot, from a US perspective, is your organization sharing best practices? Is that something that's popular in your region?
Very much so. We are, actually, I'm calling in this morning from San Diego, Southern California, where we've had a 2.5-day conference of utilities and regulators from across the Western United States. I hope my sound quality is okay. You can let me know if it's deteriorating. And we are all working, what we're doing at the California ISO, and particularly our energy market primarily operates within the state of California. But over the last several years, we've actually been extending that energy market out across the rest of the Western United States. It started out as a 5-minute real-time market, which produced about $1.5 billion worth of value over the first several years. And we're now extending that market into the day-ahead environment to try to integrate the Western United States into one big energy market. So that collaboration and that extension of our technology platform is proving very valuable.
Okay, well, that's as everyone who's worked on the European internal energy market, we wish you success with that project. It is not an easy thing to do. And Fintan, do you have an example? Sorry. Fintan, do you have an example?
So I mean, I mean, the first thing I'd say is we had earlier, as part of the keynotes, presentations from ENTSO-E, Go15 and MedTSO, which are really great examples of groups of system operators coming together to share best practices, to innovate, to deliver outputs. But maybe the one I talk about is one, and Elliot is very heavily involved in this as well and could speak to it eloquently, is the Global Power System Transformation Initiative. So this is where 6 international TSOs, so it includes Elliot and the Californian TSO, the Australian TSO, AMO, the Danish one, EnergyNet, the Irish one, EirGrid, ERCOT in the US as well, and ourselves, working with some of the leading international research institutions, Imperial College in the US, National Renewable Energy Labs in the US, Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. So a range of those. And the objective is sort of twofold at a really high level. The first is, can these system operators who are really in real time dealing with some of these challenges about integrating renewables on the system, can we inform and shape the research agenda of some of these leading institutions such that we can start to break through some of those technology and engineering barriers and really push the boundaries of international knowledge and engineering on this, and then apply them on our systems to help us manage greater and greater levels of renewable energy. So helping accelerate the decarbonisation of our grids, and at the same time then using the experience that we have gained through this research, but also through years of trial and error, to accelerate the decarbonisation journey of other jurisdictions and other countries who are not as far along and as far progressed as that. So we've been working on it for about 18 months now. It's starting to get traction, and I think is a really, really great example of where, you know, system operators, research institutions have sort of come together and said, look, how do we make this transition happen faster? Not just in our corner of the world and our sort of part of it, but on a global basis, how can we actually leverage that to make a real impact and try to accelerate that? So I think that's a really good example of how that's happening on a global scale, Siobhan.
Well, yes, that is a very interesting example, because obviously another theme running through today's discussion is the importance of technology and developing new technologies and anticipating where the new technologies will come from. So I'd like to bring Dolph in on that, because I know that is what Irina is most interested in. So you heard there about one particular project for sharing best practices. What do you see globally? I mean, do you see this as a model where you see more than one company or more than one country or more than one organization coming together with research organizations to develop new technologies, or is that something where more could be done?
Yeah, I mean, of course, always more could be done, but indeed, it is very important to have this type of dialogue. I mean, what I can say from our side, we're, for example, right now working with the African Union in development of the African Continental Power System Master Plan, where we provided our data and our tools, and they're using that now. We're working with the 5 power pools in Africa to look at how they can accelerate the deployment of renewables and provision of energy access in that part of the world. To give you another example, we've been working with Uruguay. So Uruguay is another country that is now close to 100% renewables based on hydro and wind. And the question there was, well, what can you now do in that context, for example, with electromobility? And do you need also green hydrogen in the mix to do that last 5 or 10% renewable? So, and all these cases there are interesting insights, and bringing them all together and learning from best practices is a big part of what we do.
Okay, so it's interesting because you're essentially, you keep track of what's happening around the world, and some countries can give us a sneak preview, as it were, of where, say, European countries or California want to be. I mean, a lot of these countries are perhaps smaller and maybe have slightly less complex infrastructures already, but presumably the idea is that you can see where some of the pinch points are and some of the particular difficulties. So again, I mean, Tom, from the IEA's perspective, how do you see some of these best practice? I mean, are you also following the idea of best practices being shared? Is it something that the IEA coming up with best practices that could be shared? I mean, how is that working?
Sharing best practices in our DNA. It's something we do with all our member countries. So that's all the IEA, OECD countries. We regularly review every single energy market and electricity market, and do in-depth studies as to what's working, what's not working, and provide our expertise and input as to what should constitute best practice. And increasingly, we have a program to work with our associate members. So that's countries in South America, in Asia. And there again, we have projects where we're exploring the implications for the grid on growing renewables penetration. In the same way that Irene is looking at Africa grids, we're looking at ASEAN country grids to see what scope there is for cooperation and interlinkages that there are in the ASEAN region. So there's lots of best practice out there. We have a lot of wealth of information between us all. So there's multiple avenues we can share that. We do it both at the macro level, where we look partly at the roadmaps for getting to net zero, and we're starting to do roadmaps either globally, regionally, but also nationally, in terms of what the implications are for both the change of the electricity mix, but also the increased demands for electricity as electrification is a key part of decarbonisation. But so we're producing roadmaps, but we're also looking at the electricity sector in detail, looking at, for instance, the greening of grids. This is a theme that, for instance, the COP presidency has picked up. They've created a green grid initiative, which will get a lot of time dedicated to it in Glasgow. There's the Green Grid Initiative. There's forums there about getting TSOs and regulators to talk more to each other, to work out how to better share exchange. So between us, we have a wealth of information, some very good experiments, as you mentioned, some big, some small, and we can learn from all of that.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So And thank you also for putting it in the context of the COP26, because this is the reason for having the event, and for highlighting how grid operators, the role they might play in achieving the net zero ambitions. So I'm going to come now to Joachim. And I mean, you've been hearing about best practices and sharing best practices. I mean, to an extent, EU regulation tends to be sort of the codification of best practices. So what do you see the Commission doing to support the sharing of best practices?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, if Tom said it's in the DNA of the IEA, I hope to say it's in ours as well. I think we try to work with member states sort of beyond the pure regulatory approach, also in fora which are expressly made to exchange best practices. And I mean, I could think of a couple of examples. And perhaps to start again from the infrastructure planning perspective, I mean, because that seems quite key to us. I mean, here what we've been doing for many years is basically to put both member states, authorities, TSOs, and regulators of a specific region together and in the same room, virtually or physically, and really try to make them commonly identify what are the key infrastructure priorities in terms of the missing links. And then basically try to agree on them, and bring forward a plan to bring them into place. And that does require quite a lot of discussions, as I said, in that regional context, in order also to foster sort of political agreement on such infrastructure projects. Beyond that, I could perhaps think of two other examples in terms of cooperation and sharing best practice. Just because I think Fintan mentioned the technology dimension. So, I mean, one example perhaps from the technology field, as you know, one of the big challenges is offshore. And we are trying to go towards a sort of more integrated, potentially meshed offshore grid. And in that context, one big technological challenge is HVDC, and sort of establishing some kind of integrated grid infrastructure including HVDC. Now, I think it's less a question of availability of the technology, but really of sort of having bringing it out in the water in the form of an integrated concept, and that is actually one of the priorities in our research policy. So we have a set plan group dealing with that expressly, and we also, in the context of Horizon Europe, have a couple of calls up and coming, which are specifically to bridge that technology challenge when it comes to HVDC. And just perhaps one last example, completely from the other side of things, but still important not to forget, is that what often slows down the progress in terms of completing the grid is really the permitting, concretely the procedures that, I mean, it's a simple thing to say, but a very difficult thing to address. And that is something where very, very actively we're trying, in fact, to help with the exchange of best practices from infrastructure projects, where starting from the early public consultations, basically, this has been done in a way which creates consensus. And once again, I mean, there's not a silver bullet to do that, but I mean, there are certain experiences of projects where that seems to have worked well. And together also with organizations like the Renewable Grid Initiative, which I want to mention in that context, we are trying to help TSOs to learn from each other how to do it in the best possible way. These are a couple of examples.
Okay, and I'm sorry if I smiled when you mentioned permitting, because whenever anyone mentions permitting, everyone on the panel nods. I mean, it's just a very, very well-known but seemingly very difficult problem to solve. So thank you, Joachim, for making sure it was in this discussion as well. So I just want to ask if anyone wants to, if any of our TSOs want to react to anything that was said on the best practices, because if not, then I have a few questions from the audience. And this will be, I will ask the question, and you can raise your hand. You can raise your hand if you want to come in on it. So so we have quite a broad question here, which is, and so I'm going to ask for some pithy short answers. But the question is, what investments are needed to make the grids more resilient. So we've been hearing about how you might have severe weather conditions and so on. I mean, in California, they were literally, the wires were burning. But in a more general way, what investments are needed to make the grids more resilient? Is there someone who would like to come in on that? If you would like to talk about investments, Tom, go for it. And Fintan. Okay, Tom first.
Well, before you get to the people who work on this at the coalface, so to speak, I just flag up that it's the addressing climate resilience in the electricity sector is a growing concern around the world. I mean, we've heard the Californian example. You've got the cold examples as well from like the Texas cold spell. So it's growing heat, it's growing cold, it's floods, it's fires. So there's a need to be planning for all of this. So as well as the direct investments that TSOs and DSOs have to undertake in terms of ensuring that literal grids are flood resistant or can be rediverted to avoid fire risks and so on. There's just a general planning that has to come into authorities, into TSOs, into regulators, into ministries to really start thinking about this resilience aspect, because it's not been a traditional part of what we've had to deal with. So it's a new dimension to electricity security and something that really has to be incorporated into our planning, our strategy, into the 10-year development plans. It's a new dimension. So as well as direct investments needed, and the building up of whether it's fire risk for grid, whether it's building up alternative water supplies to provide cooling, provide drought. There's those kinds of investments needed, but also the planning regime behind all of that.
Okay, so it's very much a call there for planning. Fintan, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'd say is absolutely agree with Tom that we need to do more of that sort of resilience planning for extreme weather scenarios and put it on a more structured and formal footing within different geographies and our systems. So I'd absolutely agree with that. And I'd maybe build on it a little bit to say that we also need to consider the interactions between different vectors or sectors. I mean, we saw in the Texas instance, for example, there was huge interactions between the gas and electricity systems and that. But as we electrify transport more and more, transport depends on electricity. So I think the need and importance of making sure that we plan for it is only going to increase. The final point, maybe just to build on it, that I would add is that I think a lot of our conversation to date has recognized the fact that electricity will play a really key role in that transformation of our energy systems. And ultimately, the size and scale of electricity as a source of energy for end consumers is going to grow significantly by a factor of 2 or 3. And therefore, we need to get ahead of it, because one of the issues, I think, will be it's going to take much longer potentially to build the new lines. Permitting was mentioned there as well, right? So therefore, a change in philosophy around how do we anticipate what investment is needed and make sure that it's in place in time, which I think is a little bit of a change, certainly in the UK, to how we think about the planning piece of it. So just that anticipatory investment to make sure the networks are strong and resilient and there in time, maybe would be the piece that I'd add, Siobhan.
Yeah, so I mean, as you were saying, with electricity looking to be used in many more places and by much wider consumer groups, then clearly resilience becomes a wider issue for the resilience of the electricity grid becomes a wider issue for the economy as a whole. And then you were saying there about being able to make anticipatory investments, because I understand, traditionally TSOs have been encouraged to be efficient in their investments rather than planning for something coming to the future. So Guido, you wanted to comment on that still?
Yes, I raised the hand, but I can say that Fintan very well represented what are, in this case, the situations. What I can add is that also resilience means also to be ready to restore the system when you have some events, and in particular in this case it's really important to have tools, systems that are able in this case to forecast the situation, and all devices that can anticipate what are the fault, and then to be ready to react and to restore the situation as soon as possible. Also, this I think is really important. So resilience means to be strong in events, but also to be able to restore situations when you have some faults.
Okay, so the ability to come back when things are being pushed over, that's also a key point. So we are coming near the end of the time. I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and we'll see if anyone wants to answer it. So I mean, we've been talking earlier about flexibility, and people were talking about demand side management or demand side response. So one of the questions we have from the audience is, how can large electricity users contribute on this demand side management? I mean, so the question is, you know, how could that work?
How could that work?
Or work more?
I take an initial shot. So this, both of the past 2 summers in California, as we've worked through extremely stressed grid conditions, industrial demand response has played a key role in both times, particularly when we get towards the edge of our reserve stack. We've deployed close to 1,000 megawatts of industrial demand response on several occasions, and it's been actually quite effective. I think what we're trying to do now is to ask, how do you deepen that stack of demand side response, not only just on the industrial side, but into the residential side, and trying to figure out what combination of automation and big networks do you need so that individual consumers are not actually inconvenienced or asked to really change their fundamental behavior, but through automation and large network effects, you can get aggregated demand response that you can cycle through the system. I think that's the next frontier for us in California, particularly in hot summers when a lot of air conditioning load is contributing to stressed conditions. So looking at automated thermostats and with networked and sequenced dispatch of those resources, I think that's the next big frontier for us here.
Okay, that's really interesting. Is there anyone else who would like to come in on demand side response? I see. Oh, Fintan. Oh, and Dolph. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, I suppose to reiterate what Elliot said, I think that piece around how do we make it easier for consumers to get involved, I think will be incredibly important if we're going to get sort of mass adoption at a retail level. I think in terms of the question you asked, how do large customers get involved? I mean, I think in the first instance, there's a piece around working with system operators and market operators to make sure there's a market design in place that allows them to participate. Because at the end of the day, these are consumers for whom the energy market and participating in the energy market is not their main sort of focus or reason, as distinct from a battery provider or a CCGT. But we need to make sure, therefore, that we can construct a market that allows them to participate in a way that works for them and still delivers value onto the system. And I think that may need a little bit of a shift in approach to designing markets and systems and recognizing, that these are industrial consumers for whom making widgets or delivering a service is the absolute important thing for them, but that they can contribute in this other market, they can add value, but it has to be done in a way that works for their sort of primary purpose. So that's the only build I'd have on what Elliot said there.
Yes, I mean, it's got to be profitable either way, and that can be a mindset change. So Dolph, did you want to come in briefly on demand side?
Yeah. I agree with everything that was said. I just want to add that there's a lot of batteries on wheels coming. So smart charging and perhaps vehicle to grid can play an important role going forward. And let's see what happens with these electrolyzers. I mean, if all of that happens, there will also be an interesting additional flexibility potential in a couple of years.
Okay, and obviously, just in case there's anyone who hasn't heard about hydrogen who's in this sector, the electrolyzers there would be, you know, obviously being built as a way to use up surplus renewables to produce the hydrogen to produce fuels that for sectors that would otherwise be hard to electrify. So we are coming really near to the end of our debate, and I just want to finish with one last question. And for this, I'm looking for a very short 10-second answer. Now, we know this event has been organized in the context of the upcoming COP26. So can you tell me one specific outcome or recommendation you would like to see coming out of COP26 that you either think will help the energy transition or will help you as industry people in your work on delivering on the energy transition? And so I'm going to go round, and I think I'm going to start with I'm going to go Tom, Joachim, Dolph, and then Elliot, Guido, and Fintan. So we start with Tom. An outcome from COP26.
As many improvements to NDCs as possible. The environment of COP gives plenty of ministers and others an understanding of all the good practice that's out there already, all the good policies that can be implemented in the short term, not the medium and long term, but the short term. So I would hope that fosters an awareness of good policies, which enables countries to feel more able to boost and increase the ambition of their NDCs.
Okay, so increasing the national climate ambition. Joachim, are you looking for something, one particular outcome from COP that would help?
Well, I think what we just need is as clear as possible a message that, you know, this transition is going to be global and this is going to be fast, in order to basically to give the industry the certainty that it needs to scale up, because on a global level, not only on a European level. So I think that's because that's otherwise going to be the biggest challenge. So that clarity which allows really investments.
Okay, clarity for investments. Dolph?
Yeah, same, but maybe more specific. Recognize renewables as the future for the power sector.
Renewables is the future. Okay, so higher climate ambition, certainty for investments, and renewables for the future. Elliot?
Would hope that through conversations like this, that our global policymakers see their grid operators as strong partners in the transition.
Okay, grid operators as strong partners. Guido?
Thank you. So I think that it's important that there is a recognition of the role of TSOs in driving the energy transition first, but also it's really important as I take what Fintan said. So there is a need to have a technical market mechanism, everything that are able to make energy transition faster. I think that this is a really important message.
Okay, and Fintan, you opened our event. I give you the last word.
You give me the last word. Thanks so much. I mean, for me, I think it's about urgency and about a call to action. I suppose moving from sort of policies and papers to actual concrete action with a real sense of urgency about it. We need to start delivering on the changes and the investments that are needed. So urgency and action would be my sort of pithy little phrase, Siobhan.
Excellent. So urgency and action. That's a great note to conclude our panel debate on. And I just want to thank all the panelists. I know you only hear me clapping, but imagine it's all the attendees. And so it's been a really interesting discussion. I was glad to see my old friend permitting prop up, but obviously we have some of the key themes: flexibility, market design, the scary incidents of more severe weather conditions, and TSOs having to adapt to very different market and environmental conditions going forward. So, and lots of new technologies to come. It's all fascinating and exciting and interesting. It's been a really stimulating debate. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to everyone who joined the webinar to hear it with us. I want to say that in the context of this particular event, so the organizations that have been represented here, so that is ENTSO-E and MED-TSO and Go15, they have all come out with a declaration today, which is going to be published in all of their websites, which pretty much summarizes some of the main themes that we've been going through today. So if you want to see it in writing, you can go and find the declaration. It's going to be available on their website, and it'll be published, I think, immediately after this meeting. So there's something that you can print out and read and take home with you, so that you don't forget anything from what we have discussed today. So with that, I'm going to end the webinar. It's been a really interesting experience. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for listening. And I am going to close the webinar. So thank you very much, and goodbye.